What's going on, guys? Alex with Hypnotech. How you doing? The iPhone XR is officially in the market. We are very excited to check this phone out and also the Pixel 3 and, put them side by side. They're in the same price range. This is the battle we've been waiting for. We're going to make a lot of videos about this, but in the meantime, for those of you out there who are thinking about switching from a Android phone, like something from Samsung or something from LG, and you want to switch over to the next iPhone, the iPhone XR, what are some things you need to know? Well, I have 5 things that we're going to talk about today for every Android user to think about before they switch to the iPhone XR or iPhone XS or whatever iOS experience. Okay, let's jump into it right now. The first point I'm going to make is that the iPhone experience is more similar to Android than it's ever been before. Things like the control center swiping down from the top on the iOS 12, it's very similar and reminiscent to what Android has on phones for a long time now. And the thing is, iOS for a very long time, the control center was, whenever I switched back to iOS, it was a little tricky. I didn't understand how this was efficient, how people said this was more effective than what Android did. And I guess it made some sense, and some other people felt that way too, because it has evolved to the point where it is basically similar, if not a replica, of what Android has now. You swipe down from the right side to get to your control center, which is basically the quick settings on Android. You swipe on the opposite side of the notch and you get your notifications. Basically kind of like what Android tablets used to do. If you remember Android tablets, you swipe on the right side, you get your quick settings. You swipe on the left side, you get the notifications. So it basically is using the notch to separate that. And if you're used to Android, you're going to feel right at home with the new control center here. And I think that's an awesome change. And for Android users, it makes you feel a lot more at home than in previous generations of iOS. And also something like the screen on time. So in previous generations of iPhones, I really never checked my screen on time. It was not something that was easily accessible, easily checkable. And now it's in the forefront. It's featured. It's a thing easily viewable, and that's something iOS has kind of taken upon, because as Android users, man, we measure our screen on times all the time. I don't know why. Maybe because I'm a tech reviewer myself. Screen on time was very important. I always measured my screen on time on Android. iOS users don't seem to do that, but now it's on the forefront. So that's a massive shift that I think they kind of took from Android users, and it's good. So if you're moving from an Android phone to an iPhone, this is a massive thing that you kind of would like to use. Number 2, and this is a big thing, apps. So your apps on Android on the Google Play Store will not transfer over to the iOS store, of course. So any purchased apps from your Android Play Store, you're going to have to repurchase them on iOS, and that is a huge ecosystem lock deal breaker for a lot of people, and that's kept a lot of people in the past from changing, and it'll keep people from changing now. For example, like Stardew Valley. I have Stardew Valley. It's a game. It's a farming simulator game. Terrific game, right? I have it for multiple platforms. The Nintendo Switch, of course, on the PC with mods and stuff like that. It's terrific. I love this game. I've spent, oh my god, I spent like 80 hours on this game. And of course, I'm going to buy it on the mobile platform. But if I buy it on iOS, which is only available on iOS right now, I'm going to have to buy it again on Android later on to play it on my Pixel 3, to play it on whatever Samsung or OnePlus phone I'm using. And that means I have to buy 2 copies of this game. If you're planning on switching from one generation to another, using an iPhone this generation, Android phone in the next generation, you're going to have to keep buying these apps. Same thing with Plex. I've purchased Plex in the past for both iOS and Android. And ironically, I also did the lifetime pass, but that's a different story. But there's a lot of apps out there that you're going to have to purchase twice if you're planning on switching back and forth. So that is a huge, huge deal breaker for a lot of people that keeps them from changing. Speaking of stuff like Stardew Valley, new games and apps do tend to come out on iOS first. So if you do switch from an Android phone to an iPhone, it is kind of nice to be on the opposite side of that spectrum for once, where you get the new apps, the new games, the new features first. Like Stardew Valley as an example, and also Fortnite. Fortnite came out first for iOS, Super Mario Run, things like that. So it is pretty cool to be on the opposite end of the spectrum for once. Number 3. 3 is a rather new thing when switching over from Android to iOS, and that's gestures. Gestures are actually much easier than you think. So if you're used to Android, you're used to the back, the home button, and the recent apps button, and recently with the Pixel launcher, the swipe up for the recent apps. But iOS 12 on the iPhone XR and also the iPhone 10, starting on the iPhone 10, they don't have a home button anymore. They've switched over completely to a gesture-based operating system. And the iPhone 10 gestures seem counterintuitive at first, and it took me about like 10 minutes to get a hang of it. But I do like it. I do feel like the swiping seems more fluid than tapping. And at first you think about it, it's like, why do I have to go through all these motions? Swipe up, and hold to the left to get to my recent apps when I can just press a button, press a button, press a button, press a button, the home button, the back button, the recent apps button. But you think about it, smartphones are moving away from that. We're trying to remove every button possible and just swiping to get to things. Like Iron Man. Eventually, we're gonna have HUDs, heads-up displays, and we're just gonna swipe things over. So they're training you to do that with phones. And I feel like this change is even coming on Android. You look at the Pixel 3 launcher with the recent apps, swiping to the recent apps. A lot of people hated that. I actually really enjoyed it. Ironically, I really enjoyed that experience. So that's why I'm not criticizing iOS for that change on the iPhone 10. I do think this is the future, and maybe that is also why I got the hang of it pretty easily on the iPhone XR. It's because the Pixel 3 launcher also kind of started migrating there. The fourth thing that we're going to talk about when switching over to an Android to an iPhone, you have to be prepared for the loss of the fingerprint scanner, which is very tragic. So basically every major flagship Android phone has a fingerprint scanner, and also most of them have that face identification. iPhones got rid of it over the iPhone 10, where it's only Face ID. And Face ID is solid. It's solid enough, but it is not very flexible in a wide range of situations. For example, in low light, Apple says they improved it, but it's still not reliable in low light. You wear sunglasses during the day, you gotta take them off. They do not recognize you through sunglasses, and you have no backup options. You can't use your fingerprint scanner. They don't have Touch ID anymore. And so Face ID is the only thing you got. And honestly, I've been typing my passcode in more these past few days with the iPhone XR than I have on any phone in 2 years. Really. Fingerprint scanners have gotten so reliable and so usable and flexible to use in multiple situations that I haven't typed in my passcode in a long time. Well, except for when you boot up the phone. But at a near $800 price point, it's not a compromise that I think is valid. You look at something that just was announced today, the OnePlus 6T, right? That has a in-screen fingerprint scanner and also the facial recognition. Yes, you can say that it's probably not as secure as what Apple is using here in their technology with Face ID, and that is pretty much true. There is a lot of facts that back that claim up. But what's the price difference that we're paying here? What is the price we're willing to pay for that security? Is it $200, $300? Because that's what it is. The iPhone XR is $749, and the OnePlus 6T is $549. So it's a $200 difference. You're saying for $200, Apple couldn't have fit in, say, the fingerprint scanner, an older fingerprint scanner from like the OnePlus, from the iPhone 7. They couldn't fit in the iPhone 7 or even the 6S fingerprint scanner somewhere on the body. I don't buy into that. I really don't buy into that. And I think the iPhone really needed a secondary option to unlock your phone. And it's just not there. It makes the user experience much less enjoyable. And that's something, if you're coming from an Android phone the last year or two, you're going to miss this. And the fifth point is the most controversial point and also debatable point. And a lot of people will disagree with me, but here it is. There really isn't much of a difference in performance versus a flagship Android phone like the Pixel 3. And I know a lot of people are going to be saying, Alex, what are you talking about? Did you read all the articles? Did you see the benchmarks? And that is one of the reasons why I do not talk about benchmarks in my reviews. Yes, I check the benchmarks like every tech reviewer. I love looking at numbers. Lita loves looking at numbers because she's an analyst. But we do not judge phones by that strictly. And we also don't judge strictly by specs. Let's look at this, right? The iPhone XR beats every Android phone ever made in terms of benchmarks, both in the single and multi-score. And that's not, it's true in the benchmarks, it's a fact, but the naked eye test tells a different story. I put it next to the Pixel 3 side by side, and it looks nearly as smooth and fluid one way or the other. And for a majority of people using everyday apps, everyday games, everyday performance, you really can't tell a difference right out of the box, at least. Whether the iPhone XR grows at a more respectable, ages in a more respectable way than the Pixel 3 on Android, that traditionally is true. iOS seems to last a little longer with updates. However, I run into the same problems. You know, the iPhone XR has locked up on some apps before already after a few days with it. Same thing with the Pixel 3. I've had that issue in the Pixel 3 too, where some apps lock up. That's just normal. It's a smartphone, and it does that. They are all good phones. Every phone out there that you're paying a bunch of money for, except for probably the Red Hydrogen, but that's a different story. Most of these flagship phones that you're paying for in 2018, they're damn good phones that they do basically the same thing, and they're basically the same speed-wise. I haven't seen a flagship phone where I'm like, oh my god, this is absolutely horrendous. It's so slow. Why are you paying so much money for? I have not said that. I have not experienced that in the last 2-3 years. Really, there has not been a phone out there that's that big of a drop-off. And everything else is minimal. It's being, you're nitpicking, you're taking facts and twisting it. And you can also counter-argue that with Android users. Some Android users would take specs and say that iOS is not good for this, or an iPhone is just not good enough. One thing that I do have to say, though, is it's amazing, and you have to give props to Apple for what they have done with software integration and hardware integration, because we have an Android phone with 10 gigabytes of RAM, the Mi Mix 3. The iPhone has half of that. It has even less than half of that. You have 10, it has even one less handful of it. And it's amazing what in 2018 the iPhone is doing for whatever specs it has. It just speaks volumes of what Apple is doing with their hardware and software integration. And to be fair, now that Google is also out there as a competitor, making their own hardware, buying HTC, I've seen that improvement too. The Pixel 3 software integration and hardware, it's smooth. It's buttery smooth. It is the best Android experience I've had to date. So that's my fifth point. There really isn't much of a difference in performance versus Android. And that's about it, man. Those are 5 things that I noticed when I switched over from an Android to an iPhone. And it's not just this year, it's multiple years. I do this voyage every single year where I switch over to an iPhone and do a video and use it for a certain amount of time. Majority of the time I am on Android, so there is a biasy, and that is something I'm very open with. And I think as a tech reviewer, you do have to make that very distinct knowledge available to your users. And you do have to tell them, and they have to know, and I think you have to incorporate it into your views, what your likes and dislikes are, or your users can't really relate to how you're feeling. Because some of you guys out there are like me and do think alike like I do. And for those of you who don't, the reason you're on my channel is so that you can kind of get an insight as to how I think and how I use these particular devices, especially since I use so many of them. And a lot of people out there can't afford to buy all these devices to use and test out. And Leah and I are very fortunate that our channel has been able to do this. So once again, I'm Alex with StepNoTech. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this video helped for those of you guys who are switching from an Android or thinking about switching from an Android phone to an iPhone. Let me know if you guys are actually going to do it, and if you have gone through it, and what other points that I didn't make that you think are valid. And I'll see you guys in more of these iPhone XR and Pixel 3 videos. We'll see you soon. Bye.
If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, hit the bell button below so that you don't miss a single video in the future. I'll see you guys next time.